What's up, bro? It's your boy, Mike Muse. Welcome to another conversation of the Mike Muse Show. I normally say I'm excited to be in conversation with my next guest. I love her. I am excited for all the work that she is doing at the University of Michigan. But it's unfortunate that we had to have this conversation today, particularly in regards to the Supreme Court decision regarding affirmative action. You guys have been hitting me up, DMing me. I got calls yesterday on my morning show, really wanting us to unpack it. Everybody's so frustrated. Everyone is mad. And everybody's confused, and everybody wants to know, what's at stake. I know we had a DJ come in yesterday, and his wife came along with him. His wife came straight to me in my chair, and she said, "Mike, should I be concerned?" And I told her, I said, I don't really believe in playing into people's emotions or being hyperbolic, but yes. And there's a lot that we need to do and prepare for, and we need to feel how we feel today, this weekend. But come Monday or after the 4th of July, we need to hit the streets running with solutions and with strategy and with innovation to help undo what the Supreme Court has just done, which is overturn precedent that was set. I couldn't think of a better person to join me in this conversation to help us unpack this for a multitude of different reasons, but I just want to bring her into conversation right away. I'm going to look away now because she has an amazing title, and I don't want to miss any word of her title. But Tabbye Chavous is Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer for the University of Michigan, as well as Professor of Education and Psychology at the University of Michigan. I've had the pleasure of knowing her in her new role, and she is a force for the university, and also too on the issue of diversity and inclusion, and really looking at it from a holistic perspective on campus and the admission process. Ladies and gentlemen, Tabbye, how are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to talk with you, even though the occasion for talking is not, my ideal, but I also know that there's so many people who are thinking about the ruling and what it means and its impacts. And then, as you said, most importantly, like, what do we do? And so just looking forward to the conversation.
Now, I know that you were thinking about this case. You and I have had off the record conversations. I knew you were preparing for this case, but the decision could have gone either way. But now that the decision has been made, what are your thoughts? Just what was your initial knee-jerk reaction like when you heard it?
No, I mean, I will just say my reaction was, similar to those that I've been talking with, in my own team and in community spaces and networks, is that even though people expected it, based on, the tea leaves we were reading and the other decisions that had been made by this court, that it still hit hard. It still hit hard to have the court so, markedly decide in a 6-3 decision. And I think what was most striking is the rationale, for the decision that ignored, all the things that I think should be considered like evidence. So the continued evidence of systemic racial inequality that impacts access to education, and also evidence of the impacts of removing race-conscious factors in admissions on access and enrollment in the most selective universities. So there were kind of multiple forms of evidence about the value of diversity, the continued presence of systemic racism in ways that make these kinds of access policies important, and then also evidence about what happens if we remove it. This idea that we're colorblind and therefore don't need these kind of policies anymore are not shown out by the examples across the country, including my own state, that has been under, these types of policies since 2006.
I want to get to the own state, and she's talking about the state of Michigan.
Right.
But before that, I do want to lean in just a little bit. If you could extract, systematic racism, because we do hear that term often and a lot, not just in relationship to the affirmative action case. But for you, Tabbye, when it comes to systematic racism, how do you see that as evidence being impacted in higher education and into the selection process for Black students entering into or applying to colleges and universities?
Yeah, so I think systemic racism, it manifests itself through the way that our K through 12 education is structured, where that is often, it's district and state, community, district, and state level funding, and those things are stratified by race and socioeconomic status. So the actual funding and the quality of the education and all the things that go along with quality, such as stable teachers, low teacher turnover, and the like, too, impact communities of color disproportionately compared to other communities. And all of those things then lead to the things that we look at as qualification, indicators once students apply to college. We also know that there are other things beyond socioeconomic status that matter in the lives of students and students of color. I would say in my own research, which focuses on the educational experiences of Black students and their identity development, the types of discrimination and biases that actually happen to students through the K through 12 pathway to mentor or counsel them out of college going pathways and the like, too. That happens, and it's not just happening in the case of my work, Black students in poor neighborhoods, it's happening to Black students who are in suburban contexts and the like, too. So that there are biases and structures that are in place that disproportionately affect particular student communities that directly translate into their application and access to college that should not be ignored. And in favor of this view that once people apply to college, we should be evaluating everyone based on these objective indicators that are not objective at all. Access to AP tests, access to extracurricular activities of different types that are really highly valued by the college admissions process. There's even some new research I was reading this week that even though sports is often attached to students of color, Black students, brown students, and in particular ways, that even in college application, sports participation actually favors white students in college going too, if you take away the revenue generating sports and the like too, so which make up a small proportion of college athletes. So there's so many structures in place that are racialized, that are ignored, and then the factors that remain in place, the quality of your high school, your access to AP tests, your access to test prep that allows your ACT and your SAT scores to be higher because you got testing preparation. Those things are not equally distributed and are not accounted for at all in the type of ruling that happened.
Tabbye, I think I could just conclude this interview right now because you have literally just dropped the mic right there, and you have literally described really what it is, right? And that's why I knew you could handle it's a large question about systematic racism, but I knew you could pinpoint it strategically as it relates to higher education, because oftentimes that term is used so broadly, but the way you just spelled out the systems was so accurate. And Tabbye, what you did not know, and the reason why you saw me react the way that I did, I was trying my best to hold my composure, but my audience, when you see this on YouTube, you would know why I reacted. My audience knows I've been doing these conversations, Tabbye. So I've done a conversation around AP and how difficult it is now for Black students to get into AP classes and how parents have to fight and go to the principal. I've had people from the board come on and discuss it. I just concluded a conversation with the Players Alliance with Cece Zabatia and the rest of the team regarding trying to get more Blacks into baseball and really talking about the non-revenue sports in college, how baseball can be revenue depending upon what school you are at. But for the most part, the expense that goes into audience, as you already heard from this interview previously with CC, how expensive it is to play baseball, when you are in, K through 12, right? The travel teams, the costs associated with it. Tabbye, I'm just having a conversation with the individual buddy of mine who lives up in Buffalo, New York, and he was telling me just how expensive the travel teams are for hockey, right? And so you have all the lacrosse, right? Field hockey, right? Like all these non-revenue sports that so many white students participate in, but get a certain consideration when it comes to college admissions, in particular for the liberal arts schools and colleges,
Yep. Yeah, and I think
So you nailed it.
there's even more to it with the nature of the ruling this week. So an interesting thing about the ruling is that it's actually a little less stringent than what we have in Michigan, which we can talk about in a minute. But the court minimizes the importance of kind of racism from a systemic perspective, but says that, we can consider race, at the individual level. An individual can talk in their application about the way that race has made a difference from either challenge or inspiration. That was kind of their phrasing. But what that does is it puts the kind of onus for an understanding of a systemic process on the individual. So the kinds of things that we described that we were just talking about that relate to, like, why are a student, I would say I was not the kind of 17-year-old who would have known, like, systemically why AP courses, I had one AP course available to me in high school, like why like only one was available. I wouldn't be able to explain the nature of that. My family was impacted by the Black farmers lawsuit. So there was a whole class action lawsuit that happened in the late 1990s about Black farmers who had been disproportionately, non-approved for loans, or who were approved at lower rates than their ask compared to white farmers with the same credit qualifications. I didn't really even understand that whole thing until like I was way grown.
Yeah.
Way out of college, even like that happened, and the impact of that on my family, which had to go through foreclosure and things related to that for that reason. So it puts an onus on an individual student to explain how race has impacted them in a way that totally ignores the nature of systemic inequality. That it's not just an individual experience. Yeah. It is a set of conditions in one's environment that have been structured intentionally to create, differences in access and opportunity. So that's a scary and dangerous part of the ruling, is that it says, we're doing a positive thing by saying that an individual student can talk about race. And what I'm scared of in that perspective even further is what then it will lead to. So I've already seen it, and we've had to kind of push against this kind of tendency. And there's some good research on this, where Black students, other students of color, are then encouraged to write their personal statements in this kind of tragedy, adversity way. And then someone is deciding whether their story is tragic or compelling enough for them to, like, do I think that you had enough racism for me to kind of consider you? And it's really like a really toxic, harmful thing. Is that that's not everyone's story. And people, even if that is your story, should you be forced to disclose a story that you might not otherwise? I mean, and even people who are proud of their stories, there's still this kind of perverse, like, someone else gets to judge, whether your Blackness was Black enough, from a...
In particular...
Yeah.
In particular, when it comes to like socioeconomical dynamics, right? Like the poverty-ridden story that the gala circuit here in New York City loves, right? Parading, Black and brown students to get up onto the stage and tell their most desperate stories about how single mother, if a mother or a parent was even in the home, walking 5 blocks, gang-ridden neighborhoods. But because of this program, I am now successful. Thank you, everyone out there that's looking at me, right? Like this poverty driven, the tears form in the audience. And then next thing you know, we have a silent auction, hands goes up to donate and to give more money, right? And so it's this very vicious, harmful cycle that's actually happening in the disguise of actually doing good. But yet you take another Black student who may come from a higher socioeconomical level, but in the way they experience racism is completely different than someone who experienced it at a lesser socioeconomical level. But the lived experience is all the same once I step outside, right? And I have on a Black face, right? Like what I experience in general has nothing to do with my parents, whether I come from a 2-parent household or not, whether I come from a high earning or my parents have degrees, it is not the same. So the fact that we will have to look at poverty and racism objectively from more than likely a white privileged person, and white privileged person, just if you have a degree to work at the university to even judge admission essays through that lived experience, it creates such a dangerous dynamic. And on top of that, Tab, before I move on for this, the fact of like, we always have to go through that Black experience. Like, do I want to write about my Blackness? Will that preclude me? Because then will you think I'm just getting in because I'm Black, right? And I'm not deserving of it. So I actually don't want to lean into my Blackness. I want you to see my merit and for what it is, which leads me to Grutter v. Bollinger. And so, Tabbye, I was actually at Michigan when Barbara Grutter filed that lawsuit. Audience, for those of you who may not be familiar, there was a case. She was a law school student. I was an undergrad, but she was in law school. She was applying to law school. She did not get in, audience. As a result, she sued on the basis of discrimination that basically she lost her seat to a Black person. And so that went all the way to the Supreme Court. But while we were on campus, the experience that I felt as a Black student having to be questioned whether or not I got in because of affirmative action, or because no, I had been taking AP classes since I was a junior, right? Or did I get in because I was on the honor roll, all these great things, or because I was Black, right? In affirmative action. Did I get in because no, I've been meeting with the president at the White House 2 times in high school when I'm sure you were just hanging out at the mall. But, oh, okay, I got in because I'm Black. And then the value of group dynamics and study groups and group assignments, and that the voices not wanting to be heard when I'm the only Black in the group, with that affirmative action hanging over, it shaped my experience at University of Michigan. To the fact that I actually went to the Supreme Court to march on the steps while the Supreme Court was hearing the case on that. So I have a very strong connection to the Grutter v. Bollinger in that case. So can you talk a little bit about Grutter v. Bollinger in relationship to what the state of Michigan did by putting affirmative action essentially on the ballot in Prop 2? So if you can talk about the outcome, I guess, to a more poignant question, if you can talk about the outcome of Grutter versus Bollinger, and then how that led to Proposition 2 on the ballot.
No, thank you. Well, one, I did not know that about the depth of your personal experience there. I think I had done the math calculation of it, knowing when you finished at Michigan, like, oh, you would have been there. So that is, so striking and unfortunately so resonant with other students' experiences from my own personal research, on Black college students, as well as, what trends that were happening, more broadly. The Grutter case really was the university's, initially successful attempt to make the case that, that race as one of a set of holistic factors, should be able to be considered, as a part of an admissions process. So I think the piece that is so striking about the kind of experience that you had and so many other, students have as well, is that that gets lost. Race is not we're finding the unqualified student who's never opened a book and cracked a math course and admitting them. Then race is the outweighing everything. They're literally, students have to meet, a qualification threshold, based on the foundations of their high school education, things that relate to test scores, things that relate to things that they've done in accomplishments and leadership engagement in a variety of spaces. But to say that a part of someone's experience could be, their racial background, and that we also seek to diversify racially because we know the benefits of that in a variety of ways to all students, actually, that gets lost. And so the message became you only got in because of your X. And I've had, people say if you're, Black, you can get into, someone who I went on a conference visit and someone said in Michigan, if you're not, a person of color, you can't get in. And I was like, if you're not Black, and I was like, Black students about 4%. I don't think the data show that, but the perception is so pervasive that I was just talking with my team earlier today that I did a study, with a part of my research on Black students in STEM, but it's a broader group of students. In 2017, Michigan. And then I'll get to the, what Michigan did, banned affirmative action in 2006. 2017. So no student who I was interviewing would have been coming in before affirmative action. A critical mass of them, almost every one of them, said that someone had mentioned to them that they only got in because of affirmative action.
Wow.
Like,
which wasn't even there.
Wasn't even there for a decade more, too. So this idea of assuming that Black students don't deserve and belong is so embedded in that I think it undergirds the nature of the decision that was made, this idea that an undeserved advantage. And I think that
Tabbye, I want to hold you right there because I do want you, I know where you're going to land the plane. You are going to get to the question that I asked you. So I do want to come back to that.
I was going straight to the amendment.
I know, right? But since you're here though, because we did reference the court saying, particularly from Chief Justice Roberts, stating that you can put race in your essay if you feel you overcame something, but that it shouldn't be given a bonus of a score as a result of that. So that was Chief Justice Roberts. Justice Clarence Thomas is always quoted and known for saying that affirmative action should be done away with because Blacks at these competitive schools don't perform well, right? And so you're kind of getting into that space with that conversation right there. Before we get to the other question, I'm going to get us back there. Can you address that? Can you address the misnomer of that statement?
It is like a misnomer in so many ways. One is that like was he talking about himself? I mean, someone who has benefited from affirmative action and who that enabled his access to the most selective universities in this country? Probably not, but it also is not borne out by the data. So, I mean, there's a lot of work by Bowen and Bach, kind of The Shape of the River, lots of work by, Doug Massey, other social scientists who have shown that this is actually absolutely not true, that students who are admitted to these selective institutions perform to the level of the institutions. The predictor of the graduation of the students is the graduation rate of the institution, the overall. So, I mean, I can say that at Michigan as well. Like, I could describe our challenge as making sure that we have the enrollment and recruitment numbers, because when students come, they complete. And so, our graduation rate is high in that way. And we know that, I mean, in fact, that research shows that access to those institutions not only matter for graduation. So some students with similar profiles who were not engaged in those selective institutions actually perform less well than students who are at those selective institutions, because the structures in place in those selective institutions actually promote those students completing. So I think that's a piece that's missing, is that students who are entering those institutions perform to the level of other students in those institutions because of the structures in place to support student success. Students with similar profiles, again, going to less selective ones, don't perform better, and they don't complete at higher rates. They complete at rates that are relative to the overall completion rate of those institutions. So we set a standard that if we engage students, they meet it. And it also is directly connected to social mobility. We know that students who are completing at the most selective institutions also show pathways of social mobility that are different from students who are not, allowed access into those selective institutions. Not that higher education generally has a payoff, but higher education in the selective institutions has a payoff, and a payoff for Black students and students of color in ways that are, not the same as the payoffs in other university spaces. So the data actually are the opposite of Clarence Thomas's claim, along with the kind of attached sentiment is that, oh, well, it stigmatizes students to think, and I was like, well, what's more stigmatizing is not getting in, and not having that access to that opportunity. And the policy, taking away the policy, does not eliminate the stereotypes about Black people. The stereotype didn't come from the policy. The policy was put in place because there is a stereotype and structural barriers. So I've preached enough there. I'm going to get to your other question.
No. I just want the audience to rewind that, what Tabbye just said. I'm on YouTube. Don't worry if you missed it. That right there is the evidence does not support what Justice Thomas is saying about that. And so I need for you guys to rewind, replay, get it, use it for your one, for your understanding, and then help impart others while we go. Okay, so Tabbye, go. Get to the question I was asking. If you don't mind. I can talk to you all day, but if you don't mind getting to that.
So what happened with post the Grutter, I think, victory, and again that victory was that it was allowable and justifiable to use to include race as one of many factors in thinking about students admissions and how we want to diversify the campus as well. That the state, there was kind of a campaign at the state level, a very well executed campaign. In fact, the campaign was like premised on discrimination. Do you like? Right.
Do you believe in civil rights? The question was, I believe, do you believe in civil rights? Check yes or no. Audience, you know how difficult those prop questions are. They're like 10 sentences long, very confusing if-then statements, right? But it really got down reduced to, do you believe in civil rights? Yes or no, right? Yeah. And so everyone checked yes, not realizing that they were saying that if you do believe in civil rights, everything should be race neutral, right? When it comes to decision makings, which undid affirmative action within the state.
It was, I would just say it was like, from a strategy perspective, just well executed, and that, and also feeding into the, undeserved advantage. You don't want people to think you have an undeserved advantage, and we don't solve discrimination by discrimination kind of things. And it was very effective in kind of signaling that. And I would just say the opposition to it was not as, I think, strategic or as powerful at the time. And so the state of Michigan voters, in 2006 did pass what we called Proposal 2, and that barred the consideration of race and gender in public sectors, and that includes higher education, but also other hiring public sectors as well, other industry spaces. And so not consideration of it at all, not as one factor, not as one of many factors, that it cannot be considered as a factor at all. And so that was a direct response to, I think, that progress that happened through Grutter.
Now, where I want to land in playing that, there's a reason why I asked that question, audience, because Tabbye, just so you know where I'm going with my final questions, is one, what happened to the enrollment numbers as a result of the Proposition 2 taking place? Then I want to go into, audience, whether or not we could see other states doing this, or did the Supreme Court do their job in helping the other states? And then 3, finally, solutions, and where do we go from there? So where we are at time, I want to know is what was Michigan's numbers once the Proposition 2 ban when it took away using race as a factor?
There was a consequential impact. So moving from, our highest kind of pre-Prop 2 was close to a little over 9%, African American 9.3%, and then dropping, to go under 4%. In a pretty short, kind of matter of time, for a couple of reasons, like, the campaign was very successful in lots of ways of also raising questions in Black communities about, well, I can't apply to Michigan now. So the issue was both in application and in acceptance too. So is Michigan going to admit someone like me? So impacts on applications, or if I do get admitted, are they really going to care about somebody like me and, provide a community or, take care of me, and, or families are saying, are they going to support my child, in that way? So, which
goes back to what we're saying about in the essay. Do I write that I'm Black? Do I talk about my Black experience? Do they are accepting Black people like me? It goes back to that other topic that we were just talking about. So I just wanted to bring that back into the conversation to tie that full circle.
Right. And these are not public, these are not personal documents that only one person reads. So this is, committees read these documents and the like too. So I think that was the impact there. Now, because we've been in this space for a while, I think, so we had to kind of rethink and repivot or pivot, to kind of think about within the confines of the law, how can we both message our care for Black students, but also message that, we still are invested in recruiting and admitting Black students even in kind of the proposition to legal constraints, looking at alternatives such as place-based recruitment. So unfortunately—
What does that mean for those of us who are not in admissions?
So I'll say unfortunately, because our society and, certainly the state of Michigan, but I would say the broader US is racially stratified and segregated, that, one can identify areas, that we want to focus on, so in the state of Michigan, Detroit, would be one such area that if you look demographically is very, very predominantly Black. So it's legal to focus on particular areas of geography, as long as you're not explicitly, recruiting or admitting rather, related to race. And so really thinking about how do we connect with communities and neighborhoods where we know that there's need and there's robust populations, and focus on place and geography. We also had to say, there were things happening in the state of Michigan economically that were disproportionately impacting Black families. And so, the industries change and movement out of Michigan, the decimation of certain K through 12 spaces. And so we say, well, we have to also build partnerships with K through 12 schools so that we can maximize, the number of prepared and qualified students who apply to Michigan, and then show them that we care about providing the conditions that will help them thrive. So we both engaged in more in community engagement with K through 12 schools, where we knew that the community demographics, would support diversity. And we also, again, thought about other strategies, and we're still kind of working on and building on some of those that focus on geography and place, or students' participation in particular types of programs that could be flagged, as high leverage and signaling that they get the kind of exposures and foundations that would make them admissible.
So to reset, Tabbye, as we conclude, for those of us who don't do this conversation every day, or who may not have the opportunity to sit with you like I have had the chance to, audience, what we just discussed to level set was that as a result of the state of Michigan taking away the opportunity for race to be considered for applications, University of Michigan went from 8% to 9% admissions to hovering below 4% admissions. So that is expected, what we can possibly see as a result of this decision for the Supreme Court across the board at college universities, a decrease in enrollment when it comes to that. We've already saw it too as well within the state of California school system. When that went into effect, we saw a decrease in enrollment of Black students there. The second thing that Tabbye just highlighted to mention, so one, be mindful of that. That is coming. It is fact, that's evidence. The other thing that Tabbye's mentioned is solutions, and what schools and universities like the University of Michigan is doing is strategically targeting areas and neighborhoods and zip codes that have predominantly Black residents or in schools district in order to target and recruitment process. But that does take money, that does take effort, that does take a willingness of universities to be able to go beyond and to think innovatively without in fear of legal ramifications by staying within the law. Tabbye, as I conclude with you, my two final questions are this, with that reset is being said. I also like to be solution oriented. My audience, we don't like to be soapbox here. So for those of us who want to ensure that college and universities are thinking with the level of innovation that University of Michigan is, and I'm not saying Michigan's doing it right. I'm not saying it's perfect, right? But trying, right? And having success. How can they help, right? Is it a matter of alumni from these schools and universities to reach out and to contact universities to ensure that strategies are going to be put in place to ensure this? And then the second thing, address that, and then I'm going to ask you the final question. How can people help so we don't feel so helpless?
Yeah, I think raising your voice in different ways. First of all, I will say just vote, because I think we see the consequences on the Supreme Court of what voting caused. So that's one piece. But I think the other piece is, I think in the work that Michigan has been doing to pivot, and the numbers are starting to go in the other direction. with more work, with more effort. But one of those areas is also making sure that we're connecting with our alumni and other community members to help support telling the story of Michigan, help supporting, in this case, we've done a number of things to community build with our Black students to make sure they feel like they know and can connect with faculty, staff, and alumni so that they are more motivated to both come, but also feel supported and enveloped with care when they arrive, and that does pay off in terms of their academics as well.
Yeah.
So I would say thinking about ways that if you're an alum, if you're someone who cares about this issue and you don't have to be alum, that connecting with our offices and opportunities to connect with students, to message, to do recruitment kind of, again, we're place-based and we're allowed to kind of focus on geography. So would love to think about networks nationally of engaged partners who would like to support us in spreading the word. We have worked also to support, we had much more of an in-state financial aid support structure than out of state, but because half of our students are now out of state, we must make sure that we allow for the diversity of students coming from out of state. So we also have improved both in-state and out-of-state financial aid structures. And so getting the word out is a way to partner, and then we, and what information can we provide to support you in getting the word out. I also think the other piece, whether it's because it's not just a Michigan thing, and I know you have a national following, is I think the next stage of this work is really also going to be to push back on the things that are being called race neutral. So Michigan doesn't have legacy admissions, but we actually know in other selective institutions that legacy admissions make up a disproportionate percentage of those who are admitted. And so, if there's going to be, a question and inquiry around race, then I think we have to then analyze these other under-examined criteria that are viewed not as racial, but that are highly racialized. And so parents, families, voters, in your states and spaces, really we need to be pushing back, as that as a part of the strategy, making sure that race is not defined in a way that the things that are not quote unquote race are viewed as neutral when they're not.
And so, audience, what Tabbye is just saying, Tabbye, I love being a translator. Is that, but everything is just so good. I'm having fun. Audience, what Tabbye is saying is get involved with your alma mater, right? If your school, she's asking you, you don't have to go to Michigan, although we're both Michigan folks. We bleed maize and blue. I bleed maize and blue all day, folks. I know my audience is rolling their eyes right now. If you, whatever school you went to, just call up your admissions office, call up the equivalency of a Tabbye at your institution, and to ensure, hold them accountable, hold their feet to the fire, ask how you can get involved, fundraise, create scholarships to help with that gap, because it's going to take all boots on the ground when it comes to that. And Tabbye is saying something, and she's saying, look at the legacy question that we have and making sure people raise their voices and that we do talk about this. For some of you who may not be aware, there are certain select schools where legacy is giving a consideration and a bump. And we all know, because Blacks have not been able to go to institutions for a long period of time, a lot of us didn't get a chance to read and write, our grandparents. We are further behind in this space. Tabbye don't even get me going on the GI Bill, which my audience knows really well up to this point. So we've been left out of the system of higher education. So we don't have greats, who went to these alma maters in these schools. And so as a result, typically legacy are white individuals dating back their great-grandfather, grandfather, uncle, brother, et cetera, went. And so that is the next question, right? So if we're going to do this, then we need to do it across the board. That's what she's saying. And final, Tabbye, do you see now an opening for, and this is the reason I brought up Prop 2 for the state of Michigan. Tabbye mentioned voting. Do you see other states now, in particular conservative movements, will be interested in creating a Prop 2 now, around their version of Prop 2 around other states? Or has the Supreme Court done the job of conservative groups who more likely will do a Prop 2 on the ballot? So now it's not even needed.
I mean, I think all the things that you said about what people should do apply. And for this reason, Michigan's Prop 2 is more conservative than what the Supreme Court ruled. So there's definitely space for some particular states. And some of the states have already showed their cards with the anti-DEI legislation that they've been proposing. There are particular states that might feel emboldened to take it further through state level legislation that is closer to what Michigan has, which restricts it fully in any kind of way, coupled with the anti-DEI legislation about what we can teach and learn and what we can focus on too. So the things that you advised around getting involved, with your alma maters, with your local K through 12s, if you're parents and families or taxpayers in those spaces matter too, to push back against that. I mean, the thing that you can use to push back is that the court did say that, there is a compelling reason to include the consideration of race, even though in this very individual focused way, but let's take that nugget and make sure that, if things are happening in the local community that push back against that we use their words, use those words to push back, to prevent states from taking it further.
Tabbye, that's our time. I can keep you all day. I just wanted to say thank you for your brilliance on this subject. Thank you for helping me and my audience unpack this very complicated but really simplistic opinion that got handed down from the court this week. Thank you for giving such historical context and precedent of what has happened. Thank you for giving data and evidence, all the things in my audience that we love to have, because that helps make our argument more impactful when there's data and evidence when it comes to that. And then thank you for giving us tools on what we can do moving forward so that we're not sitting, rocking in a chair about our future. Although I think a lot of us will be rocking over the weekend, thinking about this. Thank you for what you do. Just a personal note for the University of Michigan. And thank you for being the Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Michigan. Audience, I'm going to say this title, but she's a professor of education and psychology. So this is why everything she was saying had the fundamental underlining of understanding of the constructs, is because of her research that she has done over the course of her academic tenure. I hope to have you back on, Tabbye, at some point.
I would love it. And I need to take you on the road because you're the best translator that I've ever engaged with. Really appreciate having the platform. So many people care about these issues. I've been hearing from so many different communities, and what you're doing here to give voice and to keep it front burner. So appreciated.
Well, thank you. And audience, listen, until next time, enjoy your 4th of July weekend, whatever you choose to do. Definitely take some time to be reflective, but enjoy yourself. Have some good barbecue because we have a fight on our hands come Wednesday. So until next time, peace.